So, speakers, this is our pointer, and once you guys pass this to each other as your different presentations show up, you'll be able to watch it right here. The white one's forward, we'll roll it back. These are right there.
Thank you, Dustin.
Yep.
You tell me when. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. My name is Maria Cristina Didero. I'm the curatorial director of 2022 Design Miami. We are in Basel today for a talk curated by Libby Sellers that unfortunately cannot be here today because she was not feeling well. It's called The Raw and the Cooked, and we will have Patrick Featherstone to lead the talk instead of Libby. So I give it to Patrick, and thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria Cristina. As she said, it is Libby Sellers' talk that I am taking over and moderating for her. So I'm going to start off by actually reading out her introduction, because I don't think there's any point in me pretending that it's my talk. And it is great to be here at Design Miami in Basel. It's a lovely show upstairs and on the ground floor. So here we go, the raw and the cooked material transformations. When Design Miami invited me to devise one of the talks for the program this year, I was right in the middle of writing an article about Harry Batoya and Osamu Noguchi, two practitioners who moved through their early careers in design to become leading sculptors of the mid-century. And as that article was focused on their respective work in metal, material choices were occupying my mind. Of course, post-war, there was an outburst of artists eager to get their hands on the once rationed material, and with the technological advances, the choices were not only plenty, but multiplying, as were the tools with which the artist makers could independently weld, grind, sinter, cut. It was indeed a golden age for people like Batoya, Noguchi, Calder, Caro, who chose to work in metal. Now, in an era where the use of any extractive material comes with moral, environmental, and geopolitical implications, it is not so easy to celebrate. Yet, it got me, Libby, thinking how so many have turned to scrap, drawing their raw material and inspiration from the detritus of our everyday life, not just for the recycling or environmental contributions, but for their poetic value. And then she ends with a quote from Lina Bobardi, the Italian-born Brazilian architect, who said, "Raw material, rubbish, burnt-out cans, old boxes and newspapers. It's in the presence of the useful and the necessary that value is created. Human poetry doesn't come for free. It's not created out of pure fantasy. They are forms full of vital electricity." So she brought together these four people to show us some images relevant to the topic and then to talk about them. I'm going to do a brief bio introduction of them and then let them get along with telling you all about what they do. First, Marc Benda, who co-founded Friedman Benda Gallery in New York and who specializes in contemporary, modern, and historical design, and who recently did an exhibition on the 1980s design collective, Creative Salvage, with Glenn Adamson and Gareth Williams. They were led by, one of their notable people was Tom Dixon, and they did a very raw, scrap metal, transformative process that is very appropriate to this. And as Libby said, often with little more than youthful intuition and a spot welder. Following him will be Philippe Malouin, who used to work with Tom Dixon and then set up his own design studio in London in 2008. And in addition to a lot of work with leading brands doing design, he is shown by Studio 94 in New York and has work currently with the Breeder Gallery from Athens, who are showing in Art Basel. He'll be talking about a project he did with them, taking scrap work and turning it into something else, and an interesting follow-on from that when he recreated it with his students at ICAL, the local. Following that is Toshiya Hayashi and Hokuto Ando, who are the Japanese duo, it is just the two of you, isn't it? Who are We Plus. They're presenting in Curio upstairs, and they'll be talking about 2 projects they have done, taking discarded raw materials and turning them into something else. So I'm going to let them all talk about it, and then we'll see how the time goes and have some questions afterwards. Thank you. Can I start with you, Marc?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Patrick. I'm starting with a very quick PowerPoint. It's an entirely subjective suite of pieces that were created out of discarded material, or material that should have been discarded, but in the eye of a designer became something entirely new. Thinking about this suite of pictures before I start, I realized we should have done homage to a couple of people in advance of showing these designers. The ready-made, arguably invented by Marcel Duchamp about 20 years before this chair was made, but also the Dada movement that very readily used trash materials and created what was later considered art, but at the time was considered probably more transient than it really became. The other interesting thought, and I'm not going to be too programmatic in this, but the other interesting thought was that trash has been used both out of the plenty and the very little. So we see economic cycles also reflected in how designers considered their materials. So we're starting with the Cray chair by Rietveld, 1934, talking about 80 years ago. It was reportedly made out of the wood slats that would have been a crate, a wooden box. And Rietveld's idea was that this would be a chair that could be easily done, do it yourself at home. He was really giving an impulse and an idea how a very comfortable, easy chair could be produced out of material that otherwise would have gone to scrap. Note the date, in 1934, there's a worldwide depression. Materials are extremely scarce, and this is one designer's response to that scarcity. Again, these are very subjective ideas. So we jump across the pond. This is Wharton Esherick, very noted figure, one of the key figures in the early studio movement. What's interesting about these chairs is that, again, in the 1930s, Wharton Esherick bought a couple of boxes full of hammer handles. I mean, he was asked to create chairs for a theater in Pennsylvania and had practically no budget. He decided to assemble these hammer handles into chairs. What's also interesting is in the post-war years, when the economy was booming, he was repeatedly asked to repeat these designs. But then he didn't use discarded hammer handles, but instead he entirely carved them out of new and noble woods. Here we have Achille Castiglioni. This is just one of many examples of an assembly piece where he's using industrially made materials. The lamp itself is, for example, from is the front lamp of a car. There's a simple transformer involved. This is, of course, during times of boom. This is the post-war. This is the height of the post-war boom time. Here's a designer taking completely ready-made materials and creating quite a strong statement when many other designers were using very noble materials and trying to create new forms in a sculptural way. And here, of course, we harken much back to a Duchampian idea of creating form. We're jumping a little bit ahead with Gaetano Pesce. This is called the rag chair, arguably, and not as well known as many of the other icons that I'm bringing here, but arguably, to me, one of the early examples of Gaetano Pesce's genius in paving the way for decades of studio practices in the future. He basically took a bunch of clothes, doused them in resin, and created a chair out of it. Here we are, again, about 10 years later. Now we are approaching the creative salvage movement. Ronnerad creating a stereo out of cast concrete, taking, again, readily available components that compose a stereo, and making a very important statement out of that in how design could occupy a very different idea of sculptural direction than just form. This is just for fun. This is a couple of the protagonists of Creative Salvage in their studio. They're at a junkyard, and they really just brought their welders with them and walked out of chairs. This is one example. This is a little bit later. It's also a little bit polished, more polished already by Tom. But again, every single element here would have been a salvaged material from somewhere else. We're jumping again a few years. We're in a very different place, geographically not as far, but we are in Holland now. This is one of the early examples of the movement that was exemplified by Droog design. Here's Theo Remy going to different vintage shops, taking old drawers, finding them on the street, getting them from friends, and creating a piece that later became one of the early statements on sustainability and environmentalism. But at the time, it was really more this idea that someone else's junk can, in the aggregate, again become someone's treasure. Jumping forward, we're now in Brazil. The Campana brothers had made, and I struggled which piece to use actually, but I needed something around that time, so we used this. It's basically a plastic chair that is woven, that has rattan woven around it. So there's the gesture of the studio sort of enveloping something that would remain completely unnoticed, but now is almost what makes the piece more noble, is what was actually the someone else's trash. This is a very important point in this whole history for me. This is Hella Jongerius using historical parts, painting them, completely reimagining them, but giving at the same time, even though she's completely covered them, still giving homage to the basis of her work. Jae-sung uses discarded kitchen materials, everyday materials, but now what's interesting is we are again in a very different period, a very different economic cycle. She's still paying homage to the everyday, but this is, even though she's using discarded material or potentially discarded material, the idea is to create something that as a whole is a renewed, noble work exiting her studio. Couldn't do this without Martino. 100 chairs in 100 days. This was, if everyone's familiar with stream of consciousness, the idea here is really, okay, I have a pile of stuff, I have 100 days, I'm going to make a chair every day, and I have no idea what's going to happen. This is probably for today's studio practice is a very important point in that sort of serendipity that using discarded material allows you, while bringing the will of the designer onto material that was not entirely controlled by the designer, perhaps. This is a piece that's actually upstairs. This is entirely self-advertisement. It's on our booth. This is a young designer from America. He went to South Africa and a few years back and worked with weavers who make these really nice baskets that tourists buy, and he asked them, can you weave a big cabinet? They said yes, and there was a bit of a junk heap next to them. He said, well, why don't you include that there? And so basically they started weaving a new material, new materials into an age-old practice, and this combination of the tradition of the weaving and traditional shapes and then the sort of intervention of the designer was a beautiful project. Here we are in Detroit in a very different practice. This is Chris Schenk, and it was a piece commissioned by a museum in reflection to a piece they had from about 100 years ago from the Vienna Secession. What's fascinating here is this piece is entirely junk, but then he silver foiled it and resined it and made it a very precious looking object. But in reality, it's based on the debris of the collapse of Detroit that Chris Schenk poignantly witnessed. The city has since risen from its ashes, and he's a chronicler in part of that collapse and rise. To Mars, the reason I'm bringing this piece up, is that this is an entirely new generation. To Mars is good 15 years younger than Chris Schenk just before. There's a fluidity in contemporary practices that we see that don't really care anymore if something was discarded or not, if something's trash, if something's noble, if something's made now or 100 years ago. It's these sort of assemblage techniques that allow a designer today to be completely free in choices of materials rather than programmatic about it. Dan Romanelli, a figure I don't believe is very well known here. I'll be fast. Okay, he's using quilts that were discarded by someone else. Thank you very much.
Listen, Mark, that was absolutely fantastic. We have a time pressure, so that was a brilliant run through the system. Thank you very much. Can I move on now to Philippe and talk about your project with the breeder and Cal, please?
Hi, my name is Philippe Malouin, and this is not my slideshow, so I guess I'll do that. Yeah, okay. Right. Steel. Steel is something that I started working with. Primarily, I'm a furniture designer. I make furniture for mass production with brands all around the world. That occupies 80% of my time. I'm an industrial designer. That's what I do. And 20% of the time is the most fun and creative part of the process, because I have the chance to work with an art gallery in Athens called The Breeder and an art gallery in New York City called Salon 94 Design. So my obsession with steel started here. I believe it was 4 years ago. I had a solo presentation at Design Miami with Salon 94 Design. It went really well. I enjoyed working with metal at the time. I had never welded before. This is one of the chairs we presented. At the time, for that exhibition, we were working with new materials, so new steel. And I remember the foreman of the workshop we were working at just said, you know, you should probably just go and go to the scrapyard next time you have a project like this, because you can find just really weird stuff. And I thought it could be interesting. And eventually, George and Stathis from The Breeder contacted me and expressed the possibility of working together. And as you know, when you work with different galleries, I think it's important to, I only have two, and it's important to offer a different version of yourself for one place and another. And then I expressed my interest in perhaps working with scrapyards and salvaging things in a way that could have a different outcome that's not so industrially predetermined, and having, like Mark had mentioned earlier on, the copy-paste Dadaist sort of aspect to it in order to create new ideas. So this is The Breeder in Athens. It's a lovely space in Metaxurgiu. And I had the chance to work with the municipal junkyard of Athens, which is enormous, and it contains phenomenal amount of scrap metals. You can see right there. It's a train, an actual train, and everything in between that you could get your hands on. So there's plenty of a really interesting space to make discoveries. So in order to do that, you need to have transport, obviously, and you need to have people with cranes, because we worked on a much larger scale. And the interesting part is, as I said, finding things that you don't really find anywhere, and most importantly, things you cannot design on the computer in 3D, sitting in your studio, because you can never do that. We were lucky enough to be given a workspace that was walkable from where we're staying, and then we spent an entire month doing just this, which is basically going to the scrapyard, identifying things, cutting them. So I'll just show you what you need to weld things. Welding sounds scary, but it's not scary at all. You need a MIG welder. MIG welder is it's basically like a glamorized glue gun. And then you need an angle grinder, and you need a saw. And if you have those three things, then you can make a lot of things. And you just need to have the protective equipment in order to basically not hurt yourself, because that would be bad. And then once, yes, so that is Julian Comosa. He's my assistant there on the left, and myself in the middle working. And then basically we spent a month's time going back and forth from, well, a few times to the junkyard and then processing the things that we had in order to make the exhibition for the breeder. And they were very nice in not really knowing what we were going to come up with and just trusting that we were going to make things that were going to be maybe potentially nice. You know, the whole process of the exercise is to make discoveries. So if you make a four-legged table, you wouldn't necessarily use brackets to do that, or an old barrier of a building that you cut up and flame cut together, but in order to create new shapes. So I use this way of working for my industrial design practice as well, and they speak to each other back and forth. So I create things that sell in an art context, but the discoveries that I make can be applied for industrial production, and you only discover those things when you have this element of chance. This is a lot of the works that we created after a month. You can see, I think I look pretty content with being finished, and eventually everything was coated in a way that the metal would stop corroding, and we can see the installation here at the Breeder Gallery. And you know, anywhere from finding cement mixers that became planters to concrete pouring slabs to really everything in between. But I guess what I wanted to say is that when you make discoveries, you can create new ways of looking at furniture. The piece on the left I very much like, and it's actually showing across the street here at the Breeder at Art Basel. And it is a mobile working space, and half of it is a lawn bowling roller, and the other half is you know, just a quick tube that I found in order to make a computer workstation that was mobile. When you look at something like this, it could be reinterpreted in a different way for you know, for a company that makes furniture. So that's what I got interested in. Oh yeah, and then the chair on the right is a highway barrier. So it's the barrier that stops the cars from jumping out of the highway. But it had a very interesting way with how it contacts to your back, either side of your spine, which was strangely comfortable. So that's another discovery. And after this project came to fruition, it was seen. Ekal asked me to go and do a workshop with Ekal. First of all, Ekal is amazing. Ekal is amazing because it has this incredible art direction, and most importantly, it has visionary students that are incredibly talented, more talented. Like anyway, they're very talented, very creative. And my goal of the exercise for Ekal, instead of making things that were very rough and ready, I wanted them to identify streams of trash that could potentially be used for actual production. Projects, and then you'll see a few that were made. So that's the beginning. Once again, we went to a very organized Swiss junkyard, which worked differently. We identified, all of the students identified some pieces they were interested in, and got to work. And as I said, most of the time you just need an angle grinder, a MIG welder, and a saw, and then if you have these things, you can just get working really quickly without thinking too much, because thinking too much sometimes is the problem. You need to be intuitive and let your intuition run. And basically this is a cooling tube that was reinterpreted as a calorifère. A heater, yes, a space heater, sorry, which was very graphic and really fantastic. It also reminds you of a paper clip. And this is an air duct that uses a tensile spring in order to close it, and just some rubber for the base that has become a basket. And then it was painted. And this is my personal favorite. These are train connectors that constantly get, so that was the goal of the exercise for me. These are train connectors that constantly get thrown out because they need to be changed. And this lovely student drilled 6 holes in the base in order to allow the air to go through, and he made a barbecue just by adding this grill to it. So that to me was the winner, because it was something that could constantly be taken out of the trash yard. Perhaps you could identify a way to recuperate them and then just sell these barbecues. So Oh yeah, that was quite fun. When I talk about discoveries, you can discover functions that you wouldn't necessarily think of. This is a heater for a bathroom, and then it was redone as a chair, but that could be done outdoors in the winter, perhaps in ski centers, and that was an interesting find for the students who had made this and very much loved it. And I'm done.
So, Philippe, that was completely fantastic insight into the intuitive way you work. I think we should move very quickly on to We Plus. Yeah. You should definitely check out their booth upstairs, and they're going to talk through how the projects work and why you do it, I suppose.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let me introduce ourselves. We are We Plus, Tokyo-based design studio. I'm Toshiya, and
I'm Hokuto.
Yeah.
I'm super happy to be here. Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, let me introduce our. Let me introduce our new work. You can see the upstairs. Yeah, please check it again. We call our project name Urban Origin Collection. It means waste material from Tokyo as simply treated with our hand and regarded as vernacular materials. Because we are Tokyo-based design studio, so we know that koge. Koge is a Japanese word, and it means handcrafted daily product, and it combines, for example, techniques and materials and design harmoniously. And koge is known as a local production for local consumption. It is our keyword because locally everything is happen. It's very healthy and it's very good for environment.
So, I mean, the craft design is, strongly connected with local material, right? So, for example, the ceramics things is quite, ceramic is coming from the clay of the local stuff. So we love the kind of things. So we want to play with the vernacular materials in Tokyo. And then we are thinking about what is the local material in Tokyo? In a huge city like here and a huge city like New York, it's the same thing. And we need to find a local material in Tokyo. And then found, some materials. One is a styrofoam and another is a copper wire.
Yes,
right?
yes. And the first project is haze. Haze using copper wire, electric wire collected in Tokyo, discarded collected wire, collected in Tokyo. So please watch the process making video first.
This is scrap center.
Yeah, scrap center is in Tokyo. And
Junk center, or I don't know how to say in English.
Yes. So we went to there to collect the discarded electric wire. In Tokyo, there are a lot of electric wire cable you can see on the about the street. Yeah. So and every year, so many discarded electric cable we get. And inside our studio, we make this material by hand and combine it, and finally make the base or partition.
Yeah, so all is made in our studio. That is, for us, this time, that is a really important thing. Sometimes, I order to the factory and I order to another, designers or something like that. But this time, to pick up the local material and to combine and to set up everything in our studio, that is really important and quite similar to the craft culture, I can say.
Yes. And behind the copper wire, as you know, copper was the first material to be used, first metal to be used by human, and it built the foundation of modern electrical culture and civilization and telecommunication also. So, and as I said that the total length of copper wire in Tokyo is approximately 2,300 kilometers. And copper has overmined, and the production process was very, very complex. So that's why we want to reframe the relationship between humans and the materials. which has become inadequate and too complex. So that's why we choose the copper wire as a symbol of modern civilization and make our original work. So the project returned to the stories of our relationship with materials. So as I said, using vernacular materials and shaping by hands is our keyword to explore the value of copper wire beyond its original function and the utilities. And this is the work.
So upstairs, and I don't know, I can't remember the booth number, but anyway, please come and see. Yeah. After this.
Yeah. And next one is reform. We have also the movie, so please check it first. So this is an intermediate treatment plant in Tokyo, and this is the styrofoam. Styrofoam is used a lot in Tokyo because Japan has a fish market, very big fish market, and a lot of supermarket. And styrofoam is used to keep the fish fresh. And we went to there and to make the furniture directly there. To make the mold and like this. It's made by styrofoam, but the texture is very original. It don't look like plastic. It looks like a metal or ceramic or something. Yes. So, as I said, the large quantities of styrofoam are consumed in Tokyo right now. And actually, the recycling rate is very high, but the problem is the transportation system. Transportation between countries is a very big problem. For example, first in Tokyo, styrofoam was melted and turned into ingot, and most are exported to for example, Europe and Southeast Asia to make the pellet, and processed in China, and finally returned to Japan as a very, very cheap plastic product.
Yeah, so in the point of view, the very, very long trip, Japan to, South Asia, European countries, and production in China, and then shipping to Japan.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's recycled actually, but, other, problems contains.
Yes. So that's why we went to the intermediate treatment plant and make the furniture there. So to simplify the recycling process and making new things. Yeah. So as I said, our inspiration force is one of the koge. Koge is one of the very big word for me, for us, because ancient people making their tool by their hand and using their local material. It is our hint to make the new thing as a designer. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I think I am fascinated by the processes and the thinking behind all of this, but I think it's very important to remember that you end up with objects, and we are here at Design Miami Basel to look at design objects, and over in Art Basel itself for Philippe's work. And I think it is, I think the most important thing is everybody should go upstairs after this and look at everything, because the finished goods are the reason why it's all done. Now, I would like Marc to start off the last part of this conversation, because I think it's important as well to think about this in terms of the wider collectible design market. And I'm thinking specifically, I'm going to bring this up, you can shoot me down if you like. Is there something interesting about this happening now, and then the surge in interest in Sotsas and Memphis, and before that, Perion and Eileen Gray? And is there a sort of cyclical nature that replicates what happened in the 80s and actual postmodernism and actual modernism? Or am I barking up the wrong tree?
I don't know which tree you're barking up.
Tell me about how this all fits in with the contemporary collectible market, I suppose.
Okay, great. It doesn't. I mean, the idea of a market is that you have many different aspects coalescing into an aggregate whole, and not that it all runs in one direction. So I think as a field per se, design has grown tremendously over the past century and has repeatedly allowed for these different points of view. But I think more to your point, you're looking at two practices here who have done both. They've had these exchanges with existing materials or existing shapes, and then there were other aspects where they just created the shape and created and dominated the material in order to create the shape that they wanted to. So I don't think it's anything exclusive. I think it's just all happening in parallel.
Well, in that case, can I pass it on to Weplus and Philippe? Would you like to talk about what drove you to this, I would say, very process-led, but ultimately producing a great object at the end?
Well, we want to choose another material next time, because this is the first step for us to make this platform. I think this is one of the platform because in Tokyo there are a lot of another discarded material also, and for designer, I think to make a platform is one of the role of designer, and we hope to collaborate with European country or another museum, gallery also, and to push this thought and make a very, very big platform. It is our idea.
And actually, last week I went to Milan and I had some exhibition there. And then, of course, I walked around the Milan city and too many works, too many furniture, too many new design. And it makes me a little bit boring, not boring, but, full. I'm full, yes. So still, I'm thinking as a designer, do I have to produce new more furniture or new more design? I sometimes feel, I sometimes feel it's not. That's why, we do that kind of project, which I showed it. So, and then, that kind of project is quite, I think, we need to see the future, right? Somehow. So that is really important, I think.
I think I'm an industrial designer. I studied in Montreal, where we learned about designing the inside of a gas reservoir for a car. And then I went to Eindhoven Design Academy in the Netherlands, where it was all about making and process and making discoveries. So for me, using this kind of work is a way to make new work that exists on its own. Which obviously, because of the nature of itself, it's very hard to scale it up and have it in many, many homes. So obviously it lives in a space like a gallery. But most importantly, the work allows me to make a discovery of something that I could never come up with in my studio. It can only happen when I take thing one and thing B and put them together, which basically the amalgam of both creates a new function, and I can then make it into an industrially viable product, and then which then creates a new interpretation of need, and that's something I could never get to without.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, or indeed well run out of time, but I'd like to thank Design Miami Basel. I'd like to thank Maria Cristina. I'd like to thank Libby Sellers for putting it together, and I'd very much like to thank all of our speakers. I think the idea of the process behind it and the history behind it is fascinating. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being part of our program. Thank you all.